Castlehill of Strachan, also pronounced Strawn by the local community, is a scheduled ancient monument first visited by archaeologists in 1979, with excavations in 1980 and 1981. According to phonetic spellings in early charters, the name was pronounced Strathican. Between half to one-third of the motte, or summit area, has been destroyed by gravel extraction. From phase 1 of the excavation was recovered a silver halfpenny of Henry III, second issue, confirming a construction date of no earlier than 1248. A review of over a dozen charters and reliable antiquarian sources confirms that Ranulf, son of Waltheof of Strathican, was the builder. Ranulf, as will be discussed shortly, was the sheriff of Banff. Castlehill was a large two-storey timber hall that was, in Anglo-Norman tradition, shaped like a boat. These boat-shaped buildings are similar to those found on a number of Viking sites in Britain. The Great Hall measured 14 metres by 12 metres and had a height of 7 metres. Indeed, Castlehill was one of the largest buildings in Scotland at the time. The ground floor would have contained a large dining room as well as space for stores and provisions. It would have also likely provided shelter for a small number of servants and soldiers. Excavations confirm the ground floor incorporated 2 large hearths or fireplaces and 3 furnaces. Castlehill was undoubtedly a warm retreat from the wet and cold winters of the northeast. On the bottom floor, a staircase would have led to the first floor, which would have likely also included a roof space. This first floor area would have almost certainly contained the solar or private quarters of the Lord of Strathican. The roof itself was likely made of local materials, and heather would have been the thatching material. Cooking may have been done in the hearth, and equally as likely outside the hall, in a type of medieval barbecue. Bones found during the excavation confirm meals included beef, sheep, pig and fish. The hall itself was encircled by 2 defensive palisades, with the outer large enough for a wall walk. The water of the Fuick ran much closer to the motte than today, and would have encircled the fortification with running water and bogland. Together, Castlehill would have had excellent defensive characteristics. Found during the excavation was, among other things, a woman's spiral finger ring. Castlehill appears to have been continually occupied from the mid-13th century until its destruction in 1308. In the 13th century, Strawn was held in forest as a baronial hunting reserve. The village itself would not have been nucleated around the church as it is today, but rather would have taken the form of dispersed houses and small holdings spread out along the valley. Apart from possibly functioning as a hunting lodge, the motte served as a centre of local authority controlling the lands around Strathican. Charter evidence confirms the Strathican family were close allies of the common family Earls of Buchan. The Earl of Buchan ruled in the north-east, and it is said the Commons were hereditary sheriffs of Banff. However, in 1264, Ranulf, Lord of Strathican, succeeded Alexander Comyn, Earl of Buchan, as Sheriff of Banff. Indeed, Ranulf was undoubtedly a highly trusted ally favoured by the Comyn family, and perhaps the bally of the Earls of Buchan. Given the hereditary nature of the sheriffdom, this provides the first possible hint that the De Strathican family were kin to the Earl of Buchan. Indeed, charter evidence suggests that Ranulf may have been a cousin to the Countess of Buchan, Elizabeth de Quincey. This is perhaps confirmed as on 21st November 1268, Alexander Comyn appointed Ranulf one of several men to present and receive he and his wife's property. The Countess of Buchan was an heir and descendant of Roger de Quincey, the late Earl of Winchester. The following week, on the 26th of November 1268, Ranulf and Michael of Strathican and William Comyn, called the Black, are admitted attorneys to receive the property of the Countess of Buchan. Of relevance here, the 2 Strachan brothers are listed in higher precedence than the Earl's own kinsmen. Regardless, by this time, the sheriff had superseded the position of Earl in what was originally the function of the latter, the collection of revenue, and his duties also included the execution of the king's writs and the holding of courts civil and criminal. A sheriff was a personal adherent of the king, and the title combined the prestige of a local magnate and the status of a trusted official. One of the features of the sheriffdom in medieval Scotland was its tendency to become hereditary or held by a group of powerful and closely allied families. The sheriff was well placed to influence the king's appointments, and subsequently the office of sheriff was semi-hereditary. By 1278, Ranulph of Strachan, knight, had died and was succeeded by his son, John. In 1296, King Edward I of England invaded Scotland. 3 months later, on the 10th of July 1296, King Edward forced the abdication of King John Balliol, and subsequently Scotland became an occupied country. The following year, a rebellion broke out led by Andrew Moray and William Wallace. In the year 1302, it was eminently apparent that the restoration of King John Balliol was widely supported among the Scottish nobility. Robert the Bruce, ever the opportunist, refused to support Balliol's claim to the throne over his own family's interest. He subsequently defected from the Scottish cause and joined the English army of King Edward I. 2 years later, in 1304, the common family and most of the Scottish nobles were abandoned by the French and the Church, who gave priority support to the Crusades in Jerusalem. The Scots were forced to surrender to Edward I, and Scotland once more was English-occupied territory. On the 6th of February 1306, Robert the Bruce invited John Comyn, Lord of Badenoch, known as Red Comyn, to meet at the chapel of Greyfriars Monastery in Dumfries. Upon entering the church, both men disarmed. However, a fight broke out before the high altar. Robert the Bruce stabbed and murdered the unarmed Red Comyn. He and his men immediately fled to Glasgow, where they met Robert Wishart, Bishop of Glasgow, a long-time ally of the Bruce family. Rather than excommunicating Robert the Bruce for his supreme sacrilege, Bishop Wishart surprisingly gave him absolution and urged his flock to rise, pronouncing Robert the Bruce the rightful King of Scotland. The murder, described by English and common followers the following year, was, quote, an outrageous sacrilege inhumanly committed against God and the Holy Church, unquote. Shortly after Comyn's murder, Pope Clement V excommunicated Robert the Bruce, and he was also made an outlaw by King Edward I of England. With little support among the Scottish nobility, the month following his murder of Red Comyn, Robert the Bruce was hastily crowned King of Scotland on 25th March 1306. With Bruce having started a rebellion, it was inevitable that John Comyn, Earl of Buchan, and his associates, whose patriotic credentials had hitherto been impressive, were now guaranteed to fight on the side of the English. So too would those unwilling to support a murderer and usurper who had been outlawed and excommunicated. On the 19th of June, 1306, 3 months after being crowned king, Robert the Bruce gathered an army and took it north to Methven near Perth, where he met an army of English and common supporters led by Aymer de Valence, 2nd Earl of Pembroke, whose wife was the sister of the slain Red Comyn. The English and common army numbered some 3,000 men. Robert the Bruce was taken by surprise. The Bruce, his brother Edward, James Douglas, Neil Campbell and other close supporters fled the battlefield, leaving many of his most loyal followers dead or soon to be executed. While retreating from Methven, Bruce and his remaining followers, estimated to be some 400 men, were met by Clan MacDougall. The chief of Clan MacDougall was related by marriage to King John Balliol and his nephew, Red Comyn, who Bruce had earlier murdered at Greyfriars. The MacDougalls intercepted and all but destroyed Bruce's remaining men, with Bruce himself and only 40 of his followers narrowly escaping death or capture. Bruce and his few remaining men fled into the Highlands, and it is uncertain where they spent the winter of 1307. Bruce returned to the Scottish mainland in February 1307 and began a brutal guerrilla war in southwest Scotland. Gaining strength, the Bruce led an army up the west coast of Scotland, sacking castles and strongholds, killing the garrison, including those who surrendered. Bruce eventually turned inland, where he met a small army led by John Comyn, Earl of Buchan. In May 1308, the two forces engaged in what would be called the Battle of Barra, or Battle of Inverurie, and once more Bruce emerged victorious. John Comyn, Earl of Buchan, was forced to flee east to his homeland of Buchan and eventually sailed to England. While in England, the fugitive Earl was well received by King Edward, who appointed him warden of the West Marches in June 1308, but he was not to enjoy his new responsibilities for long, dying sometime before December of that same year. In the wake of Bruce's victory at Inverary, forces loyal to Robert de Bruce proceeded for several months in what is referred to as the harrying, hership, or rape of Buchan. During this period, Edward de Bruce proceeded for several months to kill those who resisted King Robert's rule. Homesteads were destroyed, livestock slaughtered and burned, and stores of grain destroyed. The destruction was not limited to Buchan and included nearby castles and strongholds held by the English or those loyal to the common cause. These castles and strongholds were also destroyed or reduced to rubble. As part of the rape of Buchan in the early summer of 1308, forces loyal to Robert de Bruce sacked nearby Aboyne Castle and slaughtered its English garrison. From archaeological evidence, we know that these forces, en route to Aberdeen Castle, burned out and destroyed the timber fortification of Castlehill of Strachan. As mentioned previously, the Strachan family were staunch supporters and kin to John Comyn, Earl of Buchan. Therefore, it is almost certain this rampage and carnage did not stop here, but included the murder and virtual destruction of the farms and homesteads in Strahan. Next, King Robert turned his attention to Aberdeen Castle, to which he laid siege and destroyed. The result of this brutal rampage throughout Buchan and Aberdeenshire was the destruction of John Comyn's power base in the north east. The following summer, on the 7th of August, 1309, John of Strachan made a charter of donation to his cousin, Sir Alexander Seton. The place of the charter was Perth, which was an English supply base and garrison town. On 23rd June 1314, at the Battle of Bannockburn, after the first day of battle, Sir Alexander Seton defected from the English and met with Robert de Bruce, urging him to fight the next day as the English troops were demoralised. It is doubtful Seton was a lone defector, and almost certainly was accompanied by his close followers, of which almost certainly included the Strachan family. Indeed, charters confirm that the Strachan family did not flee to England with the rest of the disinherited. Subsequently, it seems certain the Strachan family accompanied their kinsman Seton when he defected at Bannockburn. On the 1st of November 1315, King Robert de Bruce disinherited the Strachan family, granting the barony of Strachan to Sir Alexander Fraser, his ardent supporter, future High Chamberlain of Scotland, and future brother-in-law. This grant appears to be a textbook example of a general policy by King Robert I to redistribute lands and titles previously held by those loyal to the Balliol and common cause, and grant these lands to his allies to further cement their loyalty. Some historians of the past have claimed that William Gifford held the barony of Strachan. However, several charters refute this claim. Indeed, the Gifford family were ardent supporters of Robert de Bruce, and their stronghold was the barony and castle of Yester in Lothian. After the Scots' defeat at the Battle of Falkirk, Yester fell to the English. On 25th September 1298, King Edward I of England disinherited the Gifford family, and granted the barony and castle of Yester to Adam of Wells from Lincolnshire. Yester was later in the war retaken by Robert de Bruce, who restored the barony and castle of Yester to the Gifford family. This leads to the paradox: why would King Robert I destroy Castlehill of Strachan and disinherit the barony of Strachan from the Gifford family, while concurrently restoring the barony and castle of Yester? The only logical explanation for this contradiction is that the Gifford family were not the baronial freeholders of Strachan. Instead, Strachan was held by the Strachan family, who were staunch supporters of the Balliol and common cause. The Strachan family were with a high probability kin to John Comyn, Earl of Buchan, and actively engaged in open hostilities against Robert de Bruce. For these reasons, King Robert disinherited the barony of Strachan, granting it to Sir Alexander Fraser in 1316. This concludes the video, Castlehill of Strachan, presented by the Armigerous Clan Strachan Society, a non-profit public benefit corporation, and the Clan Strachan Charitable Trust. We sincerely hope you enjoyed the video. The information presented is exclusively for educational purposes and is not available for resale. Most of the historical information presented herein was published in the November 2021 edition of the Tayside and Fife Archaeological Journal, which underwent a double-blind peer review.
As I get by yon brego die, and o'er yon hello broom, a lassie sang recht merrily, just as the sun gaed down. Its Cairnamount is bleak and bare, and cold as Clochnaben, and you can see the snarly there along the summer's end.